Port of Bristol with Jeff Foreman, who is the Chief Officer of Police of the Port of Bristol.
That's correct.
Excellent. Now, Jeff, tell us a little bit about the Port of Bristol and the Port of Bristol Police.
Okay, so the Port of Bristol has existed since Victorian times. There are two docks. We're currently in Royal Portbury Dock, which is the newer of the two docks. So this dock is built around about the 1970s. Avonmouth Dock, which is the other side of the river behind us, that was a Victorian dock. The port itself will deal with most commodities, so anything you can think of, really 90% of everything that's imported to the country will come through a seaport of some description. Bristol are one of the biggest ones. We cover cars, coal, oil, gas. You can see a fuel ship behind me with aviation fuel, containers, alcohol, paper, stone aggregate, the whole shebang.
The whole shebang. Now, I was saying to you before we started the filming here that I've worked in policing for 30 years, and I fess up, I completely own up, that I was not aware at all that the Port of Bristol had a police force, and you are the Chief Officer for this.
Yeah, so the Port of Bristol actually predate the Metropolitan Police Service by about 26 years, so it goes back to the early 1800s in various guises, and its size of establishment has kind of grown and contracted over time, and currently there are 32 of us in the Port of Bristol Police, a mixture of both warranted officers, of which there are 15, and then there are 15 police support officers and 2 police staff, and we're responsible for policing in its truest sense within the port and a mile outside of the port. We have full policing powers and jurisdiction, and then because we are within the Avon and Somerset Home Office force area, we have, with the blessing of Andy Marsh, my counterpart from Avon and Somerset, we have got a memorandum of understanding that gives us policing powers throughout Avon and Somerset policing area, as long as it's connected to port business, and that's covered under the Maritime Act.
Now, those that have been following this policing friendship tour would know that I'm normally walking.
Yeah.
And we're not walking at the moment. And actually, I've got a hard hat on as well.
Yes.
For reasons of my own safety, I think. So, not far away. There's the other side of the that's the Avon, I'm guessing.
No, that is actually inside the.
That's inside the port area.
So that's the berth, the quayside inside the port.
Yep.
The River Avon is the other side of these lock gates.
Okay.
And then in the far distance is where the estuary goes in, and it's the other other dock.
So this is the water we see pretty much here is the port area, and there's a lock system just here with 2 tugs, I'm guessing.
Spitzer tugs.
Sat there, and in a 3-lock system. You were saying that the rise and fall here is quite sizable. The
Bristol Channel, it's the highest rise and fall tidal range within the world, so it is quite a depth, and I would imagine it's roughly, and don't quote me on this, about 20 metres.
Well, we're going to have a bit of a drive round to 2 or 3 other places.
Yeah.
But that's set the scene in the Port of Bristol with the Chief Officer of the Port of Bristol Police, Jeff Foreman. So let's head off to another
next venue.
Off to the next venue. So Jeff, change of scenery here. You mentioned, so we introduced the Port of Bristol and Port of Bristol Police. What sort of policing challenges do you get here in the Port of Bristol?
Well, for those who don't know Bristol, the Port of Bristol itself is 2,600 acres approximately. Outside the port company also own a number of industrial estates. So there are all the usual challenges that you might expect from kind of policing a busy environment. That's compounded with that we also have another taskmaster in the form of the Department for Transport, and in order to operate as a international commercial port, there are a number of conditions that you must comply with from a DFT, Department for Transport perspective. As you can imagine, that's a very highly regulated area of operation, and we are regularly inspected and held to account in terms of how we deliver what the Department for Transport wishes to deliver, and then how that then marries up, dovetails with British Policing UK PLC. And then on top of that, we are also, I suppose, the meeters and greeters and the face of the Bristol Port Company. We are actually funded by the Bristol Port Company, so we're a non-home office force, and with that brings its own challenges again, in terms of making sure that port business flows well, that customers to the port feel welcome and value, and that Bristol Port Company is an easy port to do business with. Of course, sometimes there is a challenge in terms of some of the policing operations, sometimes slow that commercial operation down, and necessarily slow, but it brings about its own natural tension.
You mentioned, I think you've got something of the order of 20 officers in the Port of Bristol Police. You came in from having been in Warwickshire, Avon and Somerset, and we'll come on to your overseas experience.
Yep.
What about the other 19 of your officers? Do they come in as new recruits to the Port of Bristol Police, or are you recruiting from other areas?
So it's very different in a kind of private sector arena. I've got an eclectic mix of officers in terms of age and experience. There are a small handful of us who have home office experience, and again, our experience within a home office force is very, very different. I completed 30 years mainly in neighbourhood policing and operations. Others have a CID background, some have a traffic background, but we're very few in numbers. Some of my staff come from a military police background and experience of policing largest military establishments and airports and naval bases, so they bring their own kind of set and skills.
So mostly experience, people with experience.
No, we're still very much in a minority.
Oh, right, okay.
We then have a number of people who have joined us in a very circuitous route and have either worked for the port under one of the operational arms and have decided that policing is something that they would like to get into, and we have various kind of entry points, so some might be purely based upon our gate work, other might be based around the Department for Transport, international security, shipping security, port facilities, regulations, and then from that we look wherever possible to recruit and fill vacancies from within. So recently I've taken 2 police support officers. They've been appointed as fully warranted constables, have undergone some limited training, but a lot of the training is based on the job.
And just as one of the tugs just pulls in near to us, some experience, then some less experienced. Training, I'm doubting you have your own training, access to training facilities and the like. So how do you manage that?
We're very fortunate. We have a very good working relationship with Avon and Somerset, who have primacy down on the port. They're responsible for the whole of Avon and Somerset, although there is an understanding that actually we are quite capable and competent, and this then becomes an area where Avon and Somerset don't have to worry about. We will provide training venues for Avon and Somerset, for driver training, for firearms. You can see we've got some very high cranes for their rope access training. Their maritime people will come down and use the facilities within the berth, and consequently Avon and Somerset will provide us with a great deal of training, ranging from body-worn videos to officer safety training to using crime recording niche systems. Some training is kind of bespoke to us. For instance, in my role here, I'm the chief officer, but I also have to be a port facility security officer, and I have to be qualified to do that. And that training is delivered where I took my training from was in Merseyside Port, up at Peel Port, and I've been accredited there. So, places.
So, and final question before we move on to another location. What are the big challenges that move across your desk then? So your team, I'm sure, very able to deal with the routine and the day-to-day, but the sort of the big thorny challenges. What do you sort of see coming across your desk?
Well, for me, my biggest day-to-day challenge is around complacency. although I talk in terms of 2,600 acres being a large part for a plot, it's obviously a lot smaller than you would be policing in a home office area. The level of, or the areas in which one can diversify to are fairly restricted within the port. So it's about how do we keep the officers that we have got and the staff that we've got fully motivated, fully engaged, and make sure that we still manage to see the wood, the trees amongst the wood, because it's the same location, dealing with the same things, the same day. And then of course the other issue for us is making sure that we keep up to date with all the changes that are going on, because we are only a very, very small part of policing, and sometimes, believe it or not, we do get overlooked.
As indeed, you should have been on my radar over the last 30 years. I apologise again that you haven't to date been. Fascinating learning about about Port of Bristol Police. We'll move on, and we're going to talk about international matters in a moment or two. Jeff, you've spent, as part of your policing career, not just time in Avon and Somerset and in Warwickshire, beg your pardon, beg their pardon as well, but also overseas. So, how did that come about? What did you make of it?
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. I did a brief exchange in the Czech Republic, but I won't really go into that too much. I think the major focus for me was I spent 18 months as the Chief Officer on Ascension Island, part of the St Helena Police Force in the South Atlantic Ocean. It's halfway between Africa and South America. Very small island, a staging post for the military. It is in fact really a military island. Everything services the runway. So I had finished with Avon and Somerset Police. I'd done my 30 years service. We'll just let a vehicle go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I finished my 30 years service with Avon and Somerset, retired, and really had no idea about what I wanted to do. Was very fortunate in that I saw the post advertised for Ascension and applied. And after a very quick sort of application process, because it was very last minute in terms of their timescales, I was fortunate enough to be selected. Sorry, I'll just turn the radio off. I should have turned that off before. I was fortunate enough to be selected and was given a 2-year contract on the British Overseas Territory. Arriving, it is very much based on English law, although the English law, because they gained independence, was kind of dated back to round about the mid-90s. So, Pace Code G hadn't quite progressed that far, so I was having to rewind my learning of the pace clock back to previous times. But most of the legislation is UK based. So if there is no law in Ascension, they go back to St Helenian law, and if there's no law in St Helena, they revert back to what the UK law is. So you're dealing with very...
So you found some similarities
So
there.
A lot of similarities. The uniform's the same. In fact, the uniform was supplied by Avon and Somerset Police, despite it being many thousands of miles away. It was a small team. Again, had a sergeant, 4 constables, 2 special constables, and we were joined on occasion by an RAF police officer. Again, very small community, a bit like the port in that respect. Issues were very community based, but because it was a very small isolated island, a reluctance maybe to report a lot of things that were happening because they were interacting with their friends and colleagues. So,
what about those who might be considering an overseas posting, whether an overseas posting from indeed the UK to elsewhere, or indeed around the world, an overseas posting from I don't know, Australia, New Zealand, or Canada to somewhere else? Something you'd recommend?
Well, I found it fantastic, and I've taken a lot from it, both professionally and personally. But it isn't policing the UK, clearly. So I think my recommendation would be for anybody considering it is to do your research, and actually what are you hoping to get from it? What do you think you are bringing to the table in terms of when you arrive in your overseas territory or wherever you might be going, and not to consider that you are the cavalry coming over the hill to rescue the day. In fact, a very good phrase that was used on Ascension Island when it came to expats months coming, because there would be a churn of 2-year contracts, was bad go and worse come. So you know, they get very change weary when people come with their best new idea, try to implement it, and 2 years later they've gone and somebody else has got the next best idea. So think about those issues, think about actually how it's going to impact on your family, because it won't just be you going. So in my case, my wife and I had a son who was 4 years old at the time who came with us, and how that's going to impact on schooling and your life, and what's your family going to do, because actually they're going to be removed from their kind of support network and all the things that are familiar to them. So it is a big upheaval, it is a big risk, but my experience has been it's definitely worth taking.
It's getting a little windier here. Let's head back to the office, where hopefully we won't get the wind effect on the microphone. So back to the office now it is. So here we are, Jeff, back in your office. Thank you for the tour around the port of Bristol. On this Policing Friendship Tour, I always ask those I interview to nominate a charity. We're trying to raise funds for various charities that relate to policing friendship and the like. Your nomination for your charity?
Well, I'm going to start off with the Gurney Fund. The Gurney Fund is something that I've been aware of from when I first joined the police way back in 1986. That fund aims to give grants to children of officers who have either died in service or have had to retire through ill health. And that would be my charity. I think making sure, or working in the knowledge that your children are taken care of should something dire and catastrophic happen to you, brings great peace of mind and a fantastic charity. The other thing that I would touch on while I was here, I'm going to nominate two. We are very closely involved at the moment with the police roll of honour. We have an officer who passed away in 1929. John Richard Holt, who was a constable here, was killed on duty. He's the only member of the Bristol Port Police who have died whilst on duty. We have funded a blue plaque in memory of him, which we are aiming to dedicate on a service on the anniversary of his death on the 8th of July. Again, it's very important that those who make the ultimate sacrifice whilst keeping the country safe, it's important that they're recognised, not just for their colleagues, but actually anybody looking can know the sacrifices that are being made. So again, Police Roll of Honour Trust is another charity.